The flames had taken everything. Alara remembered the smoke first, thick, black, choking, curling through the cracks in the wooden walls of the cottage where she had lived with her mother. She had been 7 years old, small for her age, with tangled dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her mother had pushed her toward the back window, hands trembling, voice breaking as she whispered the only goodbye Alara would ever receive. The cottage had been set ablaze deliberately. Everyone in the village knew it, though no one spoke of it. Her mother had been an Omega, unmarked, unclaimed, and therefore worthless in the eyes of the pack. Worse, she had refused the advances of the Beta's son, a cruel young man with a taste for violence and a sense of entitlement that poisoned everything he touched. Alara had crawled through that window, her small hands scraping against the splintered wood, and she had run. Behind her, the screams had faded into silence, swallowed by the roar of the fire. She had hidden in the forest for 3 days, drinking from streams, eating nothing, until a traveling merchant found her and brought her back to the village. No one wanted her. The Beta's family made sure of that. They spread whispers that she was cursed, that her mother had been a witch, that the fire had been divine punishment. The pack believed them. They always believed the powerful. She was given to the temple. The Temple of the Crescent Moon stood at the edge of the village, a structure of cold gray stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was a place of worship, or so they claimed, but Alara learned quickly that it was a place of servitude. The high priestess, a woman named Morvana, ruled the temple with an iron fist wrapped in silk and ceremony. She was beautiful in the way that ice is beautiful, sharp, unyielding, and utterly without warmth. Morvana had taken one look at Alara, at her ragged clothes and hollow eyes, and declared her fit only for the lowest work. For 10 years, Alara scrubbed floors. She hauled water from the well at dawn, before the sun rose, and she did not stop until long after it had set. Her hands were raw and cracked, her knees bruised from kneeling on stone. She slept in a small room beneath the temple, a space so narrow she could touch both walls when she stretched her arms. There was no window. There was no warmth. There was only darkness and the distant sound of prayers being sung above her head, prayers for blessings she would never receive. The other Omegas in the temple pitied her at first. They shared their bread when Morvana was not looking, whispered kind words when they passed her in the corridors. But pity faded. Alara was too quiet, too strange, too marked by tragedy. The brand of her mother's death clung to her like a shadow, and eventually, even the other Omegas stopped meeting her eyes. She became invisible. Morvana, however, never forgot her. The High Priestess had a particular cruelty reserved for those she deemed beneath her. She would summon Alara to her chambers late at night, when the temple was silent and the moon hung low in the sky. There, she would lecture her on worthlessness, on the divine order that placed Omegas at the bottom of the hierarchy, on the necessity of submission. Alara learned to stand perfectly still during these sessions, her eyes fixed on the floor, her breathing shallow. If she flinched, If she spoke, if she showed even the slightest hint of defiance, Morvana would strike her. The blows were never hard enough to leave visible marks, but they were precise, calculated to cause maximum pain with minimum evidence. "You are nothing," Morvana would say, her voice soft and venomous. "You exist only because we allow it. Do you understand?" Alara always nodded. It was the only answer that kept her alive. But survival came at a cost. The village beyond the temple was no kinder. On the rare occasions when Alara was sent into the market to purchase supplies, she was met with sneers and whispers. Children threw stones at her. Merchants refused to serve her unless she paid double the price. The Beta's family, now firmly in control of the pack's affairs, made a sport of humiliating her. The Beta's son, the same man who had destroyed her mother, would corner her in alleyways, his breath reeking of ale, his hands rough and grasping. He never went further than words and threats, not because he feared consequences, but because he enjoyed the terror in her eyes more than any physical conquest could provide. Alara learned to make herself small. She learned to move through the world like a ghost, unseen and unheard. She learned to bury her anger so deep that even she forgot it was there, until the night of the harvest moon. The harvest moon was the most sacred night in the pack's calendar, a time when the goddess was said to walk among her children and bless the worthy. The temple prepared for weeks, polishing every surface, arranging flowers and candles, rehearsing prayers and hymns. Morvana was in her element, orchestrating the ceremony with the precision of a general commanding an army. Alara, as always, was relegated to the background, tasked with ensuring the candles remained lit and the incense burned steadily. The ceremony began at midnight. The pack gathered in the temple courtyard, dressed in their finest clothes, their faces glowing with anticipation. Morvana stood at the altar, her arms raised toward the moon, her voice ringing out in a language Alara did not understand. The ritual was beautiful in a cold, impersonal way, all smoke and chanting and flickering light. Alara stood in the shadows, watching, waiting for it to end so she could return to her room and sleep. Then the scream shattered the night. It came from the inner sanctum, a place forbidden to all but the highest-ranking priestesses. The sound was raw, primal, filled with a terror so profound it seemed to claw at the air itself. The chanting stopped. The courtyard fell silent. Morvana's face went pale, then red, then rigid with fury. She turned and strode toward the sanctum, her robes billowing behind her. The pack followed, drawn by morbid curiosity, and Alara, against her better judgment, followed as well. The inner sanctum was a circular room lined with ancient carvings, symbols of the goddess and her moon. At the center of the room lay the body of Sister Thalia, one of the senior priestesses. Her throat had been cut, the wound deep and clean, and her blood pooled around her like a dark halo. Her eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. In her hand, she clutched a small silver dagger, its blade stained red. The pack gasped. Morvana did not. She stood at the edge of the blood, her gaze sweeping the room with predatory focus. Then her eyes landed on Ilara. "You," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a whip. Ilara's heart stopped. I didn't." Silence. Morvana stepped forward, her expression triumphant. "You were in the temple tonight. You had access to the sanctum. And you—" She pointed at Ilara's hands, at the faint smudges of red on her fingers. Ilara looked down, confused. She had been carrying the incense earlier, and some of the herbs used in the ceremony left a reddish residue. But it was not blood. It could not be blood. "That's not—" Ilara began, but Morvana cut her off. "Guards, seize her." 2 men stepped forward, members of the pack's enforcers, their faces grim and unyielding. They grabbed Ilara by the arms, their grips bruising, and forced her to her knees. She struggled, panic flooding her veins, but they were too strong. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. Cursed, witch, murderer. Morvana knelt beside the body, her movements deliberate, theatrical. She lifted the dagger from Thalia's hand and held it up for all to see. "This blade bears the mark of the moon," she said. "It is sacred, kept in the Omega quarters." Only those with access to that area could have taken it. Ilara's mind raced. The Omega quarters. She lived there. But so did a dozen other women. Why her? Why now? Then she saw it. The faintest flicker of satisfaction in Morvana's eyes. The curve of a smile that did not reach her lips. This was planned. Thalia's death. The dagger. The timing. It was all a trap. And Ilara had walked into it without even realizing. "I didn't kill her," Ilara said, her voice trembling but firm. "I swear on the goddess I didn't—" "The goddess does not listen to the prayers of murderers," Morvana said coldly. She turned to the Beta, who stood at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed, his expression smug. "What is the punishment for such a crime?" The Beta did not hesitate. "Death." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Death. For a crime she did not commit. For a life she had never wanted to take. She looked around the crowd, searching for even one sympathetic face, one person who might speak on her behalf. But there was no one. The Omegas would not risk Morvana's wrath. The pack members did not care. And the Beta's family, they were already celebrating. Morvana raised her hand, and the guards hauled Ilara to her feet. "Take her to the dungeons," she commanded. "We will carry out the sentence at dawn, in accordance with tradition." The dungeons beneath the temple were worse than Ilara's room. They were damp and cold, the walls slick with moisture, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. The guards threw her into a cell and locked the door, leaving her in total darkness. She sank to the floor, her body shaking, her mind spinning. This could not be happening. It was a nightmare, a cruel joke played by a merciless universe. But it was real. Hours passed. Ilara did not sleep. She sat with her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, and she tried to think. There had to be a way out. There had to be something she could do. But every plan she formed crumbled under the weight of reality. She had no allies, no resources, no power. She was an Omega, and in this world, that meant she was disposable. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the dungeon ceiling, Alara heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, approaching her cell. She looked up, expecting the guards, expecting to be dragged to her execution. But the figure that appeared was not a guard. It was the Beta's son. He stood outside the cell, his face half-shadowed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Hello, little Omega," he said softly. "I wanted to see you one last time before they kill you." Alara did not respond. She stared at him, her expression blank, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear. He laughed, a low, ugly sound. "You should have been nicer to me," he said. "If you had, maybe I would have spoken up for you. Maybe I could have convinced my father to spare you. But you were always so proud, so stubborn. Even now, even when you're about to die, you won't beg." "I have nothing to beg for," Alara said quietly. "You would not grant it." His smile widened. "You're right. I wouldn't." He leaned closer to the bars, his eyes glittering with malice. "Do you want to know a secret? Thalia's death, it was my idea." "Well, mine and Morvana's. She wanted you gone, and I wanted to see you suffer. So we made a deal. Thalia was old, useless. No one will miss her. But you—" He paused, savoring the moment. "You're the perfect scapegoat." Alara's stomach turned. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, hearing the casual cruelty in his voice, made her want to scream. But she did not. She simply looked at him, her gray eyes steady, and said, "The goddess sees all." He laughed again. "The goddess doesn't care about you. She never has." He turned to leave, then paused. "Enjoy your last sunrise, little Omega. I know I will." And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving Alara alone in the darkness. She closed her eyes. The goddess sees all. It was something her mother used to say, a phrase whispered in the quiet moments before sleep. Alara had never been sure she believed it. The goddess had not saved her mother. The goddess had not protected her. But in this moment, with death looming and hope extinguished, it was the only comfort she had. The guards came for her as the sun crested the horizon. They unlocked the cell, pulled her to her feet, and bound her wrists with iron shackles. The metal was cold against her skin, biting into her flesh. They led her through the temple, past the rooms where she had scrubbed floors and hauled water, past the altar where Morvana stood watching with cold satisfaction. The pack had gathered in the courtyard, a sea of faces eager for spectacle, for blood. At the center of the courtyard stood a stone platform, stained dark from previous executions. Alara was brought to it, forced to her knees, her head pushed down so that her neck rested against the cold surface. She could see the axe from the corner of her eye, its blade gleaming in the early morning light. Morvana stepped forward, raising her arms for silence. "We gather here to witness the will of the goddess," she intoned. "This Omega, Alara, has been found guilty of murder, of desecrating the sacred sanctum, of spilling the blood of a faithful servant. For this crime, she will pay with her life." The crowd murmured their agreement. Alara felt the weight of their judgment, the certainty of their condemnation. She thought of her mother, of the flames that had taken her. She thought of the years spent in servitude, in silence, in pain. And she thought, with bitter clarity, that perhaps this was always how it was going to end. The executioner stepped forward, a massive man with arms like tree trunks. He lifted the axe, and Alara closed her eyes. Then the world exploded. It began as a sound, a low, resonant howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ground trembled. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that made the hairs on Alara's arms stand on end. The crowd gasped, stepping back, their faces turned toward the forest beyond the temple walls. From the trees emerged wolves. Not ordinary wolves, but creatures of legend, massive and powerful, their fur shimmering like liquid silver in the dawn light. At their head was the largest wolf Alara had ever seen, its eyes burning with an intelligence that was unmistakably human. The pack scattered, their bravado crumbling in the face of this ancient primal force. Even Morvana stumbled backward, her composure shattered. The great wolf stepped into the courtyard, and the air around it seemed to shimmer. Then, before Alara's disbelieving eyes, it shifted. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded, and in the space where the wolf had been stood a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell to his collar and eyes the color of molten gold. His presence was overwhelming, a force of nature contained in human form. He wore no shirt, his chest bare and marked with scars that spoke of countless battles, and his expression was one of absolute authority. This was no ordinary alpha. This was a king. He surveyed the courtyard with a gaze that made even the beta flinch. Then his eyes landed on Alara, still kneeling on the platform, her neck against the stone, and something in his expression shifted. His eyes widened, just slightly, and he took a step forward. "Stop!" he commanded, his voice like thunder. The executioner froze, the axe still raised above his head. The Alpha King crossed the courtyard in long, purposeful strides. The crowd parted before him, fear and awe mingling in their faces. He reached the platform and looked down at Alara, his golden eyes searching hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he reached out, his hand hovering just above her shoulder, and Alara felt it. A pull, a connection, something deep and inexplicable that made her breath hitch. His gaze dropped to her wrist, to the thin, pale skin marked by years of hard labor. And there, faint but unmistakable, was a name. Written in elegant script, as though tattooed by an invisible hand, was a single word: Liana. The Alpha King's face went pale. His hand trembled, just for a second, before he clenched it into a fist. "Who did this?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Who dared to mark her?" No one answered. The courtyard was silent, save for the whisper of the wind. The Alpha King looked back at Alara, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen directed at her before: recognition. Not of her, but of the name on her wrist. Liana. A name that meant nothing to Alara, but everything to him. "You will not die today," he said, his voice firm. He reached down, breaking the iron shackles with his bare hands as though they were made of paper. "You are coming with me." Alara stared at him, unable to speak, unable to process what was happening. The Alpha King turned to face Morvana and the Beta, his expression colder than ice. "If I find that this Omega has been falsely accused," he said quietly, "I will return, and when I do, there will be no mercy." He lifted Alara into his arms, cradling her against his chest, and without another word, he carried her away from the temple, away from the pack, away from the only life she had ever known. Behind them, the courtyard erupted into chaos, but Alara did not hear it. All she could hear was the steady beat of the Alpha King's heart, and all she could feel was the name on her wrist, burning like a brand she did not understand. The Alpha King's castle rose from the mountains like a monument to power itself, a fortress of black stone and iron, its towers piercing the clouds, its walls thick enough to withstand sieges that had never come. Alara had heard stories of this place, whispered in the temple during long nights when the Omegas shared tales to keep the darkness at bay. They said the Alpha King was a monster, that he had killed his mate in a fit of rage, that he ruled his territory with cruelty and bloodshed. They said his castle was filled with the bones of those who had displeased him, that no Omega who entered ever emerged. Alara had believed those stories once. Now, cradled in the arms of the man himself, being carried through corridors lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on ancient stone, she did not know what to believe. He had not spoken since they left the temple. His wolf pack, those magnificent silver creatures, had followed them through the forest, a silent honor guard that melted away as they approached the castle gates. Guards had snapped to attention at their arrival, their eyes widening when they saw their king carrying an Omega in his arms, but none dared question him. He strode through the castle with purpose, his footsteps echoing in the vast halls, and Alara, too exhausted and confused to resist, simply let herself be carried. He brought her to a chamber in the eastern wing, a room so different from anything she had known that she gasped despite herself. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting forests and moons, the floor covered in thick rugs that looked soft enough to sleep on. A massive bed dominated one wall, piled high with furs and linens, and a fire crackled in the hearth, filling the space with warmth. It was a room fit for nobility, not for a condemned Omega from a forgotten village. The Alpha King set her down gently on the edge of the bed, his touch careful, almost reverent. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them, and for the first time, Alara got a proper look at him. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, though his eyes held the weight of centuries. His face was hard, all sharp angles and stern lines, but there was something beneath the surface, a pain so profound it radiated from him like heat from a flame. The scars on his chest were not decorative. They were evidence of survival, of battles fought and won at great cost. His hands, though gentle when they had broken her shackles, were calloused and marked with old burns and cuts. This was a man forged in violence, shaped by loss. He was staring at her wrist. Alara followed his gaze and saw the name again. Lyanna. In the firelight, it seemed to glow. The letters formed in a delicate script that looked nothing like a tattoo, and everything like magic. She touched it with her other hand, confused. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "I've never seen this before. I don't know how it got here." The Alpha King's jaw tightened. "How long have you had it?" "I don't," Alara shook her head. "I don't know. I've never noticed it before tonight. Before you." She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Before I looked at you," he finished for her, his voice rough. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his shoulders rigid with tension. "This is impossible." "What is?" Alara asked. Fear crept into her voice despite her efforts to sound calm. "Who is Liana?" The Alpha King was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My mate. My true mate. Given to me by the goddess herself." He paused, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "She died 3 years ago." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Alara's breath caught. A dead mate. The bond between true mates was sacred, unbreakable, written into the very fabric of their souls by the moon goddess. When one died, the other was supposed to follow, consumed by grief and the severing of the bond. That the Alpha King still lived, still ruled, spoke of a willpower that defied nature itself. "I'm sorry," Alara said softly, because she did not know what else to say. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Sorry." He turned back to face her, and his golden eyes were blazing. "Do you know what it means, Omega, that her name appears on your skin? Do you have any idea what the goddess is telling me?" Alara shook her head mutely. "It means you are connected to her somehow. It means the goddess has marked you with my dead mate's name for a reason." He stepped closer, his gaze intense, searching. "Who are you? Where do you come from? What is your lineage?" "I'm no one," Alara said, her voice small. "My mother was an Omega, unmarked and unclaimed. I don't know who my father was. I've lived in the temple since I was 7, working as a servant. I'm nothing, no one important." "The goddess does not mark no one," he interrupted sharply. "There is a purpose here, a design I cannot yet see." He studied her face, his expression unreadable. "What is your name?" "Alara." "Alara," he repeated, as though testing how it felt on his tongue. Then, more formally, "I am Kael Thornheart, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. You will stay here in this room, under my protection, until I understand what this mark means." "I'm a prisoner then," Alara said quietly. Kael's expression softened, just slightly. "You are under my protection," he repeated. "There is a difference. No one in this castle will harm you. You will be fed, clothed, given everything you need. But you will not leave until I have answers." Before Alara could respond, there was a knock at the door. Kael's demeanor shifted instantly, his spine straightening, his face becoming a mask of authority. "Enter." The door opened to admit a woman in her 50s, tall and lean with silver streaking through her dark hair. She wore the practical clothing of a high-ranking servant, and her sharp eyes took in the scene with quick efficiency. The Omega on the bed, the king standing protectively nearby, the tension thick enough to cut. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing her head. "I heard you returned with a guest. "This is Alara," Kale said curtly. "She will be staying in this chamber. See that she has everything she requires, clothing, food, whatever she asks for. And send for Healer Marin." "I want her examined to ensure she has not been injured." The woman's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she was too well trained to question her king. "Of course, Your Majesty. Shall I?" "Now," Kale said, his tone brooking no argument. The woman bowed again and left swiftly. Kale turned back to Alara, his expression conflicted. "Beatrice will take care of you. If you need anything, tell her. I must attend to other matters, but I will return tomorrow to speak with you further." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "The name on your wrist, Liana, she was everything to me. If the goddess has brought you here, marked you with her name, then there is a reason. I intend to find out what it is." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click, leaving Alara alone in a room that felt too large, too warm, too safe to be real. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours. She had gone from condemned prisoner to, what? Protected guest? Puzzle to be solved? She looked down at her wrist again, at the name that had appeared from nowhere. Liana. A dead woman's name, written on her skin like a brand. What did it mean? Why her? Beatrice returned quickly, accompanied by 2 younger servants carrying trays of food and a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and healer's pouches strapped to her belt. The healer introduced herself as Marin and proceeded to examine Alara with gentle efficiency, checking for injuries, malnutrition, signs of abuse. Her mouth tightened when she saw the scars on Alara's hands, the bruises on her knees, the faint marks on her back from old punishments. "You've been through a great deal," Marin said quietly as she applied a soothing salve to Alara's wrists where the shackles had cut into her skin. "But you're safe now." The king may be many things, but he does not harm those under his protection. Alara wanted to believe her. The food they brought was more than she had seen in months: roasted meat, fresh bread, vegetables cooked in butter and herbs, sweet pastries that melted on her tongue. She ate slowly, afraid her stomach would rebel after so long on meager rations, and when she was full, the servants drew her a bath. The bathing chamber adjoined the bedroom, a luxury Alara had never experienced. The tub was enormous, carved from white marble, and the water was hot, scented with oils that smelled of lavender and cedar. Beatrice helped her undress, her expression carefully neutral when she saw the full extent of Alara's scars, and then left her to bathe in privacy. Alara sank into the water and, for the first time in 10 years, she wept. Not from pain, but from relief, from exhaustion, from the sheer overwhelming impossibility of everything that had happened. She had been so close to death, the axe raised above her head, her life measured in heartbeats. And now she was here, in a castle, in a room fit for royalty, marked with a dead queen's name. She did not understand any of it. After the bath, Beatrice returned with night clothes, soft linen that felt like silk against Alara's clean skin. The servants turned down the bed, stoked the fire, and then, with quiet bows, they left her alone. Ilara climbed into the bed, sinking into furs and blankets that enveloped her like a cloud, and she stared at the ceiling, certain she would not sleep. But exhaustion claimed her within minutes, pulling her down into darkness so complete she did not even dream. She woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows she had not noticed the night before. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her body tensing in anticipation of the cold stone floor and the distant ringing of temple bells. Then memory returned, and she sat up slowly, taking in the room in daylight. It was even more beautiful than she had realized. The tapestries depicted not just forests and moons, but wolves running beneath star-filled skies, their forms elegant and powerful. The furniture was carved from dark wood, polished to a shine, and fresh flowers had been placed on a table near the window while she slept. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her voice uncertain. Beatrice entered, carrying a tray with breakfast, and followed by 2 servants bearing armfuls of clothing. "Good morning, miss," Beatrice said briskly. "His Majesty has requested your presence in his study after you've eaten and dressed. I've brought you some clothing options. I had to guess at sizes, but we can have them altered if needed." Ilara stared at the dresses being laid out on the bed. They were beautiful, made of fine fabrics in deep colors: forest green, midnight blue, soft gray. Nothing like the rough, stained shifts she had worn in the temple. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why is he doing this? I'm just an Omega. I'm nothing." "You bear a mark the king recognizes," Beatrice interrupted gently. "That makes you important, whether you understand it or not. Now, eat your breakfast before it gets cold, and then we'll get you dressed. His Majesty is not a patient man." The breakfast was as lavish as the dinner had been: eggs, bacon, warm bread with honey, fresh fruit. Ilara ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere, and then allowed Beatrice to help her into one of the dresses. They chose the gray one, simple but elegant, with long sleeves that covered the name on her wrist. Beatrice braided Ilara's hair, her hands quick and practiced, and when Ilara finally looked at herself in the mirror, she did not recognize the woman staring back. She looked almost noble. "The king's study is in the west wing," Beatrice said, leading her through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Servants paused in their work to stare as they passed, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Ilara kept her eyes down, old habits dying hard, but she could feel their judgment like a physical weight. The study was a large room lined with bookshelves, a massive desk dominating the center. Maps covered one wall, marked with territories and borders, and weapons hung on another. Swords, axes, bows, all maintained to deadly perfection. Kale stood at the window, his back to the door, his posture rigid. "Your Majesty," Beatrice said with a bow. "Ilara, as you requested." Kale turned, his golden eyes finding Ilara immediately. He studied her for a long moment, taking in the dress, the braided hair, the way she held herself. Small, cautious, ready to bolt. "Thank you, Beatrice." "You may go." Beatrice bowed again and withdrew, closing the door behind her. Silence stretched between them. Ilara stood frozen, unsure if she should speak, sit, or simply wait. Kale gestured to a chair near the desk. "Sit." She obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to take flight. Kale sat across from her, leaning back, his gaze never leaving her face. "Tell me about your mother," he said abruptly. Alara blinked. "My mother?" "Everything you remember." Her name, where she came from, what she looked like, anything that might explain the mark on your wrist. Alara swallowed hard. She had not spoken about her mother in years. The memories were painful, sharp-edged things she kept locked away. But the Alpha King was waiting, his expression implacable, and she had no choice but to answer. "Her name was Mira," Alara began slowly. "She was gentle, kind. She had dark hair like mine and green eyes. She never spoke about her past, about where she came from or who my father was. When I asked, she would smile and say it didn't matter, that all that mattered was that we had each other." Alara's voice caught. She was unmarked, unclaimed. The pack treated her like she was less than nothing because of it. When the Beta's son tried to... When he came after her and she refused him, they burned our cottage. They killed her and made it look like an accident. Kyle's expression darkened. "The same Beta who presides over your village now?" "Yes." "And his son?" "He's the one who told me he helped frame me for the priestess's murder," Alara said quietly. "He admitted it, the night before I was supposed to be executed. He thought it was funny." Kyle's hands clenched on the arms of his chair, his knuckles going white. "I see." He was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. Then, "Your mother, did she have any marks? Any scars, tattoos, anything unusual?" Alara thought back, sifting through memories dulled by time and trauma. "She had a scar," she said slowly, "on her shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. She told me it was a birthmark, but it looked too perfect to be natural." Kyle went very still. "Which shoulder?" "The left." He stood abruptly, turning away from her, his breathing harsh. Alara watched, confused and frightened by his reaction. "What is it?" she asked. "What does it mean?" Kale did not answer immediately. He went to the window, staring out at the mountains beyond, his broad shoulders tense. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "The crescent moon mark is the sign of the moon-touched bloodline. It's ancient, rare, given only to those descended from the goddesses chosen. My mate, Liana, she bore that mark." Alara's heart began to pound. "Are you saying my mother was—" "I'm saying it's possible your mother was related to Liana," Kale said, turning back to face her. His eyes were blazing with an intensity that made Alara shrink back. "Which would explain why Liana's name appeared on your wrist. You're not just some random Omega, Alara. You carry the bloodline of my dead mate." The words struck Alara like a physical blow. She stood, shaking her head. "That's impossible. My mother was nobody." She had no family, no pack, nothing. "Or she was hiding," Kale said flatly. "The moon-touched bloodline has enemies. If your mother was fleeing something, she would have concealed her identity, lived as an unmarked Omega to avoid detection. It would explain everything. Why she never spoke of her past, why she was killed when she drew attention to herself." Alara felt the room spinning. This was too much, too fast. She had spent her entire life being told she was worthless, that she came from nothing, that she was less than dirt beneath the pack's feet. And now this stranger, this king, was telling her she carried the blood of legends? "I don't believe you," she whispered. Kyle crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping just in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the gold flecks in his eyes. "Show me your wrist," he commanded. Trembling, Alara extended her arm. Kyle took her wrist gently, pushing back the sleeve of her dress to reveal the name. Liana. In the daylight, it was even clearer. The letters formed an elegant script that seemed to shimmer when the light hit them at certain angles. Kyle traced the name with 1 finger, his touch feather light, and Alara gasped. The moment his skin made contact, she felt it. A surge of energy, warm and electric, racing up her arm and spreading through her entire body. Her breath hitched. Kyle felt it too. She could see it in the way his eyes widened, the way his hand tightened fractionally on her wrist. "The bond," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It's there. Faint, but there." "What bond?" Alara asked, her voice barely audible. "I thought your mate was dead." "She is." Kale released her wrist and stepped back, his expression tortured. "But the goddess works in ways we cannot comprehend." "If you carry Liana's blood, if you are her kin, then perhaps—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't know. I need to consult the old texts, speak to the pack elders. This is beyond my understanding." Alara wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite the warm room. "What happens to me now?" Kyle looked at her, and for a moment, his hard exterior cracked, revealing the man beneath, lonely, grieving, desperate for answers he might never find. "You stay here," he said quietly. "You are under my protection, and you will remain so until I understand what the goddess intends. No one will harm you, Alara. I swear it on Liana's memory." It was a vow, spoken with the weight of absolute conviction. Alara wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that she was finally, truly safe. But trust was a luxury she had never been able to afford, and she did not know how to start now. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. Kale nodded. "What was she like, Liana?" Pain flashed across Kale's face, raw and visceral. He was silent for so long, Alara thought he would not answer. Then, quietly, "She was light itself, strong, fierce, compassionate. She challenged me, made me better than I was. When she died, she took part of my soul with her." He met Alara's eyes, and in his gaze was a warning. "Do not mistake my protection for affection, Omega." "You are here because the goddess has marked you with my mate's name, not because you matter to me personally. Keep that in mind." The words stung more than Alara expected. She nodded, lowering her eyes. "I understand." Kyle turned away, dismissing her. "Beatrice will show you the castle. You are free to go where you wish, except the West Tower. That is forbidden. Do not test me on this." "Yes, Your Majesty," Alara murmured. She left the study with her head down, her heart heavy. As the door closed behind her, she heard a sound from within, a crash, as though something had been thrown against the wall. The Alpha King, alone with his grief and his ghosts, raging against a fate he could not control. Alara understood that feeling all too well. The days that followed blurred together in a strange mixture of luxury and isolation. Alara was given everything she could possibly need: fine clothing, abundant food, a warm bed. But she was also utterly alone. The servants treated her with polite distance, their eyes sliding away whenever she tried to speak to them. The guards watched her with suspicion, their hands never far from their weapons. And Kale? The Alpha King avoided her almost entirely. She saw him only in passing, glimpses of his broad shoulders disappearing around corners, the sound of his voice echoing from distant chambers as he conducted the business of ruling. When their eyes met across the great hall during meals, she ate alone in her room, but sometimes ventured to the kitchens and saw him through doorways. He would look away first, his expression unreadable. Alara told herself it did not matter. She told herself she was grateful for the distance, that she did not want his attention anyway. But late at night, when the castle was silent and she lay in her too large bed staring at the ceiling, she felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on her like a physical thing. Beatrice became her only real companion, though the older woman maintained a professional reserve that prevented true friendship. She showed Alara the castle, the sprawling kitchens where dozens of servants prepared meals for the pack, the armory filled with weapons from 100 different battles, the library that housed thousands of books Alara had never learned to read properly. The temple had taught her basic letters, enough to read prayers and scripture, but nothing more. Literature, history, philosophy. These were luxuries denied to Omegas. "Would you teach me?" Alara asked one afternoon as they passed through the library, her fingers trailing over leather-bound spines. "To read, I mean, properly." Beatrice looked surprised, then thoughtful. "I could arrange for a tutor if His Majesty approves." "Would he approve?" "I don't know," Beatrice admitted. "He's been distracted since you arrived, but I'll ask." True to her word, Beatrice brought the matter to Kale, and to Alara's surprise, he agreed immediately. A tutor was assigned, an elderly scholar named Aldrich, who had served the royal family for decades. He was patient and kind, with a gentle manner that reminded Alara painfully of her mother. Under his guidance, she began to truly read, not just decipher words, but understand meaning, nuance, beauty. The stories she discovered in those books opened worlds she had never imagined. Tales of heroes and monsters, of love and loss, of ordinary people who became extraordinary through courage or fate or sheer stubborn will. She devoured them hungrily, spending hours in the library while Aldrich watched with approval. "You have a quick mind," he told her one day, adjusting his spectacles. "It's a shame it wasn't cultivated earlier." "Omegas aren't meant to read," Alara said quietly, repeating what she had been told her entire life. "We're meant to serve." Aldrich's expression hardened. That's what some would have you believe. But the goddess gives intelligence to all her children, regardless of their designation. Those who deny education to Omegas do so out of fear, not divine mandate. Fear of what? Of what you might become if you realized your own worth. The words stayed with Alara long after the lesson ended. Worth. It was a concept she had never applied to herself. In the temple, her worth had been measured by how well she scrubbed floors, how silently she endured punishment. Here, marked with a dead queen's name, her worth seemed tied to something she did not understand and had not chosen. What would her worth be if she could choose it herself? The question haunted her as she explored the parts of the castle she was permitted to see. She avoided the West Tower as commanded, though she often found herself staring at it from windows, wondering what secrets Kael kept locked away. The tower was separate from the main structure, connected by a covered bridge, and guards were posted at its entrance day and night. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, Ilara stood at a window overlooking the courtyard and saw Kael emerge from the tower. His shoulders were slumped, his usual rigid posture absent, and even from a distance she could see the exhaustion etched into his features. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world and losing the battle. Something in her chest tightened. Sympathy, she told herself. Nothing more. He was grieving his mate, and that grief was clearly eating him alive. It had nothing to do with her. But the name on her wrist seemed to burn, a reminder that she was somehow connected to his pain whether she wanted to be or not. The castle held other secrets beyond the Forbidden Tower. Alara discovered them slowly, carefully, during her wanderings. There were rooms that had been sealed shut, their doors locked and covered in dust. Portraits hung in forgotten hallways, faces of past kings and queens staring down with solemn expressions. And there were the whispers, servants gossiping when they thought she could not hear, fragments of conversation that painted a picture of a kingdom still recovering from tragedy. "3 years and he still goes to that tower every day. Heard he nearly died when she passed. The bond breaking almost killed him. Unnatural, keeping her things like that, like a shrine. And now this Omega appears, marked with the dead queen's name. It's a curse, I tell you." Alara learned that Lyanna had been beloved, not just by Kael, but by the entire pack. She had been strong and fair, a queen who fought alongside her warriors and cared for the weak. Her death had been sudden, an illness that came on quickly and took her within days, despite the best healer's efforts. Kyle had been inconsolable. He had locked himself in their chambers for weeks, and when he finally emerged, he was a changed man, harder, colder, more ruthless in his rule. The pack whispered that he should take another mate, that the kingdom needed a queen, that his refusal to move forward was weakness. But Kyle would not hear of it. He had loved Lyanna with a ferocity that transcended death, and he would not dishonor her memory by replacing her. And now Alara was here, wearing the dead queen's name like a brand, and no one knew what it meant. A week passed, then 2. Alara fell into a routine: lessons with Aldrich in the mornings, meals in her room or the kitchens, afternoons spent reading or walking the castle grounds. The grounds were beautiful in a wild, untamed way. Gardens grew in controlled chaos, filled with flowers that bloomed even as autumn deepened. Beyond the walls, forests stretched to the horizon, and mountains rose like sleeping giants. She was standing in the garden one afternoon, watching birds flit between branches, when a voice behind her made her jump. "You should not be out here alone." Alara turned to find a man watching her from the garden path. He was younger than Kale, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sandy hair and warm brown eyes. He wore the leather armor of a warrior, and a sword hung at his hip. His expression was friendly, curious rather than hostile. "I'm sorry," Alara said automatically, starting to retreat. "I didn't know I wasn't allowed." "You're allowed," he interrupted with a slight smile. "I just meant it's not safe. These gardens border the forest, and there are wolves, not pack wolves, wild ones, that sometimes come close. You shouldn't be without protection." Alara relaxed slightly. "I didn't see any guards." "That's because I sent them away. I wanted to meet you properly." He bowed, a gesture that seemed half mocking, half genuine. "I'm Darius, captain of the King's Guard and his oldest friend. And you're the mysterious Omega everyone's talking about." "Alara," she said quietly, "I'm not mysterious, just marked." Darius's smile faded. "May I see?" After a moment's hesitation, Alara pushed back her sleeve to reveal the name on her wrist. Darius leaned closer, his expression growing serious as he studied it. "Lyanna," he murmured, "I don't understand how this is possible. Magic like this. It's from the old times, from the goddess herself." "The king thinks my mother was related to his mate," Alara said, "that I carry the same bloodline." "Is that what he told you?" Darius straightened, his eyes sharp. "What else did he say?" "Not much. He avoids me." Darius laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's Kale for you." When he doesn't know how to handle something, he ignores it until he can't anymore. He studied Alara for a moment, then said more gently, "You must be lonely here." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Alara blinked back sudden tears and looked away. "I'm fine." Liar. But Darius said it without judgment. "Come, walk with me. I'll tell you about the castle, about the pack. Maybe it'll help you feel less like a prisoner." They walked together through the gardens, Darius pointing out different plants and telling her stories about the castle's history. He was easy to talk to, his manner relaxed and open, and Alara found herself responding despite her usual caution. He told her about growing up with Kale, about the mischief they had gotten into as boys, about the day Kale met Lyanna and how it had changed everything. He was wild before her, Darius said. Arrogant, reckless. She tempered him, made him think before he acted. She was the only person who could challenge him without fear. He paused, his expression growing sad. When she died, we thought we'd lose him too. The mate bond breaking should have killed him. That it didn't. I think part of him wishes it had. That's why he goes to the tower, Alara said softly, understanding. Her things are there. Darius nodded. Everything she owned, preserved exactly as she left it. It's not healthy, but none of us can convince him to let go. He looked at Alara, his gaze searching. And then you appear, marked with her name. I don't know if the goddess is offering him hope or torturing him. I don't want to torture anyone, Alara said quietly. I didn't ask for this, Mark. I don't understand it. I know. Darius's voice was kind. But understanding or not, you're here now. And that means something, whether any of us are ready for it or not. They parted ways as the sun began to set, Darius escorting her back to the main castle before heading to his own duties. Alara felt lighter than she had in days. Having someone to talk to, someone who did not look at her with suspicion or pity, was a gift she had not expected. That night, she lay in bed staring at the name on her wrist and wondered about Lyanna. What had she been like? What would she think of Alara wearing her name, living in her castle, protected by her mate? Would she be angry? Grateful? Indifferent? The questions had no answers, but they occupied Alara's mind until sleep finally claimed her. The next morning, Beatrice woke her earlier than usual, her expression tight with worry. His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room immediately. Alara's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Visitors have arrived from your village. They're demanding your return. The throne room was massive, its vaulted ceiling supported by pillars carved to look like ancient trees. Kyle sat on a throne of black stone, his posture radiating authority and barely controlled rage. Darius stood at his right hand, and other warriors lined the walls, their expressions hard. At the center of the room, flanked by guards, stood three figures Alara recognized immediately. The Beta, his son, and Morvana, the High Priestess. They looked smaller here, less imposing than they had in the village, but their eyes still held the same cruelty, the same certainty of their own righteousness. When Alara entered, escorted by Beatrice, all three turned to stare at her. The Beta's son smiled, a cold, ugly expression that made her skin crawl. There she is, he said loudly. The murderer who escaped justice. Kale's voice cut through the room like a blade. You will address me, not her. State your business, and do it quickly. My patience is limited. The Beta stepped forward, bowing with exaggerated respect that bordered on mockery. Your Majesty, we come to reclaim what was stolen from us. This Omega was convicted of murder in our territory. By our laws. She was sentenced to death, a sentence that was not carried out due to your intervention. We demand her return so that justice may be served. Justice. Kyle's tone was flat, dangerous. You speak of justice while standing in my hall, demanding the return of an Omega you tortured and falsely accused. Do you think me a fool? The Beta's expression flickered. Surprise, then calculation. Falsely accused? Your Majesty, I assure you, The evidence was clear. The evidence was fabricated. Kyle stood, and the room seemed to shrink around him, his presence overwhelming. I have spent the past 2 weeks investigating your claims. I sent my best trackers to your temple, and do you know what they found? He descended the steps from his throne, his golden eyes blazing. They found the real killer. Sister Thalia was murdered by another priestess, a woman who confessed under questioning that she was paid by you. He pointed at the Beta's son, and by your high priestess to commit the crime and place the blame on Alara. Morvana's face went white. The Beta's son opened his mouth, then closed it, his confident smile evaporating. The Beta himself tried to maintain composure, but Alara could see the panic in his eyes. That's a lie, Morvana said, her voice shaking. We would never. I have the confession written and signed, Kale said coldly. The priestess is currently in my dungeons, and she was very forthcoming once she understood the consequences of continued silence. She told me everything. How you needed Alara gone because she witnessed something she should not have. How you used her as a scapegoat because she was powerless, friendless, easy to blame. What did I witness? Alara asked, her voice cutting through the tension. She stepped forward, ignoring Beatrice's restraining hand. What was so important that you had to kill me to hide it? Morvana's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not answer. The Beta's son did. You saw nothing, he snarled. You're lying, just like you lied about— Enough. Kale's command silenced him instantly. The Alpha King turned to Alara, his expression softening fractionally. According to the priestess's confession, you witnessed the Beta's son and the High Priestess engaged in activities that would be considered sacrilege. They were in the inner sanctum, desecrating it with their affair. When they realized you had seen them, they decided you were a liability. Alara's mind raced back, searching her memories. Then it clicked. A month before her arrest, she had gone to the sanctum late at night to replace candles. She had heard sounds, saw movement in the shadows, but she had not stayed to investigate. She had left quickly, thinking it was none of her business. They had killed Thalia and blamed Alara for a glimpse she had barely registered. You destroyed my life over that? Alara's voice was shaking, fury building in her chest like a storm. You condemned me to death because I might have seen you breaking your vows? You are nothing, Morvana hissed, her composure finally cracking. An Omega, a servant, worthless. Your life means nothing compared to the sanctity of the temple, compared to my position. Your position is forfeit. Kale's voice was ice. By the laws of this land, which supersede your village's petty rules, you are guilty of conspiracy to murder, false testimony, and abuse of religious authority. The penalty is death. The throne room went silent. Morvana swayed, her face ashen. The Beta's son lunged forward, but guards caught him before he could reach Kale, forcing him to his knees. The Beta himself fell to his knees as well, his hands raised in supplication. Your Majesty, please, I had no knowledge of this, I swear. Your son acted with your authority, Kale said coldly, and you allowed an innocent to be condemned without proper investigation. At best, you are criminally negligent. At worst, you are complicit." He gestured to his guards. "Take them to the dungeons. I will pass final judgment after consulting with my advisors." As the guards dragged the three away, the Beta's son twisted back to stare at Alara, his eyes filled with hate. "This isn't over," he spat. "You think you're safe here, but you're not. You're still just an Omega, still nothing." A guard struck him across the face, silencing him. Then they were gone, their shouts echoing down the corridors until distance muted them to nothing. Ilara stood frozen in the center of the throne room, her body trembling. It was over. The people who had tormented her, who had tried to kill her, were going to face justice. She should feel relieved, vindicated. Instead, she felt hollow. Kael approached her slowly, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" Alara looked up at him, this powerful king who had saved her not once but twice, and she did not know what to say. "Why did you investigate?" she finally asked. "Why did you care what really happened?" Kael was silent for a moment. Then quietly, "Because the goddess marked you with my mate's name. That means something. And I do not allow injustice to stand when I have the power to correct it." He paused, then added even more quietly, "And because no one deserves what they did to you." It was the closest thing to kindness he had shown her since that first night. Alara felt tears pricking at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not here, not in front of his court. "Thank you," she whispered. Kael nodded once, then turned away. "Darius, escort Alara back to her chambers. Ensure she has everything she needs." He strode back to his throne, his shoulders rigid, and Alara understood she was dismissed. Darius appeared at her side, his hand gentle on her elbow. "Come on, let's get you out of here." They walked in silence through the corridors, Alara's mind spinning. Justice. She had never expected to see it, had never dared to hope for it, and now it was hers, delivered by an Alpha King who barely knew her, who protected her only because of a name written on her skin in magical ink. When they reached her chambers, Darius paused at the door. "He cares more than he lets on," he said quietly. "Kael, I mean. He wouldn't have gone to such lengths if you didn't matter to him." "I matter because of Lyanna," Ilara said, "not because of me." Darius's expression was sad. Maybe that's true now. But things change. People change. Give him time. He left her then, and Alara entered her room alone. She went to the window and looked out at the forest beyond the castle walls, at the mountains rising in the distance. For the first time since her mother died, she was truly free. No one owned her. No one controlled her. The people who had tormented her would face justice, and she was under the protection of the most powerful alpha in the territory. She should be happy. But happiness felt like a concept from another world, something she had read about in books but never truly experienced. Freedom was not joy. It was simply the absence of chains. And the name on her wrist, Lyanna, reminded her that she was still bound, in ways she did not yet understand, to a dead woman and the king who mourned her. Ilara pressed her hand against the window glass, feeling its coolness against her palm, and wondered what the goddess wanted from her. What purpose could she possibly serve in this strange, painful drama? The answer, she suspected, would come whether she was ready for it or not. Winter came to the mountains with brutal swiftness. One day the forests blazed with autumn colors, and the next, snow blanketed the world in silence. The castle, built to withstand such cold, became a fortress against the elements. Fires burned in every hearth, and the servants moved through the corridors with purposeful efficiency, ensuring that no one froze in the deepening chill. Ilara watched the first snowfall from her window, mesmerized by the way the flakes danced in the wind before settling on the ground like a blanket of stars. She had seen snow before, but never from such a vantage point, never with the assurance that she would be warm and fed regardless of the weather's fury. In the temple, winter had meant chilblains and hunger, her thin clothing insufficient against the cold, her small room beneath the stone floors like a tomb of ice. Here, she had furs and wool, a fire that never went out, and hot meals delivered 3 times a day. The guilt of such comfort sat heavy on her chest. She tried to speak of it to Aldrich during one of their lessons. They sat in the library, surrounded by books, a fire crackling nearby. Aldrich had been teaching her about the history of the Northern Territories, about the ancient pacts and their traditions, but Ilara's mind kept drifting. "I don't deserve this," she said suddenly, interrupting his explanation of territorial boundaries. Aldrich looked at her over his spectacles, his weathered face patient. "Deserve what, child?" "All of this. The room, the food, the safety. I'm just an Omega. I haven't done anything to earn it." Aldrich set down the book he had been holding and regarded her seriously. "May I tell you something about the concept of deserving?" Ilara nodded. "Deserving is a construct created by those in power to justify their cruelty," Aldrich said. "They tell the poor they deserve poverty because they are lazy. They tell the weak they deserve subjugation because they are inferior. They tell Omegas they deserve servitude because the goddess ordained it." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But the goddess ordained no such thing." She created alphas, betas, and omegas with different strengths, yes. But she never decreed that one should suffer while others prosper. That hierarchy was built by wolves who wanted power and needed an excuse to take it. "The temple taught differently," Ilara said quietly. "The temple taught what benefited those who ran it," Aldrich countered. "Think, Ilara. Who profited from your belief that you deserved nothing? Who gained from your silence, your acceptance of abuse? Morvana, the beta." "All of them." "Exactly." Aldrich sat back, his expression softening. "You were taught to see your suffering as divine will, so that you would not question those who inflicted it. But you are here now, safe and warm and learning, and that is not charity. It is justice. Long overdue, perhaps, but justice nonetheless. Do not let the lies of your past poison the truth of your present." His words settled into Ilara's heart like seeds in fertile soil. She had spent so long believing herself worthless that imagining herself as deserving felt like heresy. But Aldrich's logic was sound, and more importantly, it was kind. Perhaps she could learn to accept this new reality, to believe that she had as much right to warmth and safety as anyone else. It would take time. The days grew shorter as winter deepened. Alara continued her lessons, devouring knowledge with the hunger of someone who had been starved of it for too long. She learned history and mathematics, philosophy and astronomy. Aldrich was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, and he seemed genuinely pleased by her progress. "You could be a scholar yourself, given proper training," he told her one afternoon. "Your mind is well suited to it." The idea was absurd, an Omega scholar. But Alara found herself smiling nonetheless. Maybe in another life. Or in this one, if you choose it. Darius visited her often, his presence a bright spot in the otherwise quiet routine. He would bring news from the outside world, tell her stories about the pack, make her laugh with his irreverent humor. He never treated her like she was fragile or broken, never looked at her with the pity that others did. To Darius, she was simply Alara, and that was a gift more valuable than he probably realized. "The pack is talking about you," he told her one evening as they walked through the castle's indoor gardens, a warm space filled with plants that thrived despite the winter cold. "I'm sure they are," Alara said dryly. "What are they saying?" "Some think you're a blessing, sent by the goddess to heal the king's grief. Others think you're a curse, an imposter trying to take the dead queen's place." Darius shrugged. "Most just don't know what to make of you." "What do you think?" Darius was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I think the goddess doesn't do anything without reason. If she marked you with Lyanna's name, there's a purpose. Whether that purpose is to heal Kyle, or to teach him something, or to serve some greater plan we can't see yet, I don't know. But I don't think you're here by accident." "That's not really an answer." He grinned. "I'm a soldier, not a philosopher. I deal in what is, not what might be." "And what is, right now, is that you're here, you're under the king's protection, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." Alara felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Darius." "For what?" "For treating me like a person, not a mystery to be solved." His grin softened into something more genuine. "You are a person, Alara. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Despite Darius's friendship and Aldrich's kindness, Kale remained distant. Alara saw him at meals now. Darius had insisted she join the court for dinner, arguing that hiding in her room only fueled the rumors, but Kyle barely acknowledged her presence. He sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by his advisors and warriors, and conducted his business as though she did not exist. It should not have bothered her. She told herself it did not bother her. But late at night, when the castle was silent and she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she wondered what he thought when he looked at her. Did he see Lyanna? Did he see a stranger wearing his dead mate's name? Did he see anything at all? The name on her wrist had faded slightly as winter progressed. the letters becoming less distinct, as though whatever magic had created them was slowly losing its power. Ilara did not know if that was normal or if it meant something ominous. She did not ask, afraid of the answer. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered the castle corridors with a candle in hand. It was foolish. If caught, she would look like she was snooping. But the restlessness in her chest demanded movement. She walked without direction, letting her feet carry her where they would, until she found herself standing at the base of the covered bridge that led to the West Tower, the Forbidden Tower, Chaol's private domain. Guards stood at the entrance, their expressions hard and unyielding. They watched her approach with obvious suspicion, their hands moving to their weapons. "I'm not going in," Ilara said quickly, raising her hands. "I was just walking. I'll go back. Let her pass." The voice came from behind the guards, from within the bridge itself. Chaol emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable in the flickering torchlight. He was dressed simply, without his usual formal attire, and his hair was disheveled as though he had been running his hands through it. The guards looked shocked. "Your Majesty, you said no one." "I know what I said," Chaol interrupted. "Stand down." They obeyed, stepping aside, though their expressions clearly questioned their king's judgment. Chaol looked at Ilara, his golden eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Come." It was not a request. Ilara hesitated, every instinct screaming that she should refuse, that crossing into that forbidden space was dangerous. But Chaol was already walking back across the bridge, clearly expecting her to follow, and after a moment's indecision, she did. The bridge was enclosed, its windows looking out over the courtyard far below. Their footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Chaol did not speak, and Ilara did not dare break the silence. At the far end, a heavy door stood open, revealing stairs that spiraled upward into darkness. Chaol climbed without looking back. Ilara followed, her heart pounding. The tower room was circular, its walls lined with shelves and trunks and carefully preserved objects. Candles burned everywhere, their light warm and golden, illuminating what could only be described as a shrine. Dresses hung on mannequins, their fabrics rich and beautiful. Jewelry sparkled in glass cases. Books lay open on tables, as though their reader had just stepped away. Paintings covered the walls, all of the same woman, Lyanna. She had been beautiful. Dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, eyes the color of emeralds, a smile that radiated warmth even in painted form. She looked strong and gentle at once, regal and approachable. In every painting, she wore the crescent moon mark on her left shoulder, the same mark Ilara's mother had borne. Ilara stood frozen just inside the doorway, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. This was Chaol's grief made manifest, his love preserved in amber, unchanging and eternal. "She was wearing this the day we met." Chaol's voice startled her. He stood beside a mannequin draped in a green dress, his hand hovering over the fabric but not quite touching it. "We were both young, arrogant. She challenged me to a duel because I had insulted her pack. She won." A faint smile ghosted across his lips. I fell in love with her before the fight was over." Alara did not know what to say. She watched Kale move through the room, touching objects with reverent care, and she understood that this was his sanctuary, the one place where he could still feel close to the woman he had lost. "Why did you bring me here?" she finally asked. Kyle turned to face her, his expression raw. "Because I need to understand. The goddess marked you with her name. You carry her bloodline. When I touch you, I feel..." something. An echo of the bond, faint but real. He crossed the room to stand directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I need to know if you feel it too, or if I'm going mad with grief." "Feel what?" Alara whispered. "This." Kyle took her hand, the one with Liana's name on the wrist, and pressed it against his chest, directly over his heart. The moment their skin made contact, Alara gasped. Energy surged between them, warm and electric, making every nerve in her body sing. It was not painful, but it was overwhelming, a connection that felt ancient and new at once, like two souls recognizing each other across the void. Kale's eyes widened. "You feel it." It was not a question. Alara nodded, unable to form words. The sensation was like nothing she had ever experienced. A pull toward him so strong it terrified her. A rightness that made no sense but felt undeniable. "What is it?" she managed to ask. "I don't know." Kale's voice was hoarse. He released her hand and stepped back, his expression tortured. "It's not the full mate bond. That died with Liana. But it's something. A connection. I've consulted every elder, every ancient text, and no one can explain it." Alara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her racing heart. "Maybe it's because of the bloodline. If my mother was Liana's kin, maybe the connection you feel is just..." "Recognition of shared blood." "That's what I tell myself," Kale said. "But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like..." He cut himself off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter what it feels like. Liana was my mate, my only mate. Nothing and no one will ever replace her." The words should not have stung, but they did. Alara forced herself to nod. "I understand." "Do you?" Kale's gaze was intense, searching. "Do you understand what it means to love someone so completely that losing them tears your soul apart? To wake every morning knowing they're gone and wishing you had died with them? To see someone who carries their name, their blood, and feel both drawn to them and repulsed by the very idea of that attraction?" Alara met his eyes steadily. "No, I've never loved anyone like that. I've never been loved like that. But I understand loss. I understand grief." "And I understand that I'm not trying to replace her. I didn't ask for this mark, didn't ask to be brought here. I'm just trying to survive, the same as you." Something in Kale's expression shifted. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. He looked at her as though truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a mystery or a burden, but as a person with her own pain, her own struggles. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I've been unfair to you. You didn't choose this any more than I did." "No," Alara agreed. "But we're both here now. So what do we do?" Kale was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving around the room, taking in the remnants of his dead mate's life. Then, slowly, he said, "We find out what the goddess wants. Together." It was an offering, Not of friendship, perhaps, but of truce, of partnership in unraveling the mystery that bound them. Alara considered it, weighing the risks against the alternative of remaining in ignorance. Together, she agreed. Cale nodded once, then gestured toward the door. "It's late. You should rest. We'll begin tomorrow." Alara left the tower, her mind spinning with everything she had seen and felt. As she crossed the bridge and made her way back to her chambers, she touched the name on her wrist, feeling it tingle beneath her fingers. Whatever was happening, whatever the goddess intended, she and Cale were caught in it together. And for the first time since arriving at the castle, Alara felt like she might have an ally in understanding her fate. The next morning, Cale summoned her to the library. When she arrived, she found him surrounded by books and scrolls, his expression focused and determined. Aldrich was there as well, along with an elderly woman Alara had never seen before. She was tiny and wizened, her skin like weathered leather, but her eyes were sharp and bright. "This is Elder Morna," Kyle said by way of introduction. "She's one of the oldest living members of my pack, and she knows more about the old magic than anyone else in the territory." Morna looked Alara up and down with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. "Come here, child. Let me see this mark." Alara approached hesitantly and extended her wrist. Morna grasped it with surprising strength, her fingers cold and dry. She examined the name, Liana, with narrowed eyes, muttering under her breath in a language Alara did not recognize. Finally, Morna released her and turned to Cale. "It's a soul mark, but not the kind I've ever seen before. It's connected to you, Your Majesty, but also to something older. The goddess's hand is in this, but I cannot read her purpose. Can you tell us anything useful?" Cale asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Morna smiled, showing gaps where teeth had once been. "The mark is fading because it has served its initial purpose, to bring the girl to you. What happens next depends on the choices you both make." She looked at Alara. "You carry the blood of the moon-touched, child. That blood is powerful, and it calls to those who have known it before. His Majesty's bond with his mate was so strong that even in death, it recognizes her lineage in you." "So the connection is just about bloodline?" Alara asked hopefully. "I did not say that." Morna's eyes glittered with amusement. "Bloodline is part of it, yes, but there is more. The goddess does not mark souls lightly. If she has brought you together, it is because you both have roles to play in something larger than yourselves." "What roles?" Cale demanded. "That I cannot tell you. The goddess reveals her plans in her own time." Morna gathered her shawl around her shoulders. "But I can tell you this. The mark will not fade completely unless you reject what it represents." "And if you reject it," she shrugged, "well, the goddess does not take kindly to those who spurn her gifts." With that ominous pronouncement, Morna shuffled out of the library, leaving Cale and Alara staring after her. "That was spectacularly unhelpful," Cale muttered. Aldrich cleared his throat. "Actually, Your Majesty, I may have found something relevant." He opened one of the ancient books, its pages yellowed with age. This text discusses soul bonds and their variations. According to this, when a true mate dies, the surviving mate sometimes experiences what's called a resonance bond with blood relatives of the deceased. It's not a new mate bond, but a connection formed through shared lineage and the remnants of the original bond's energy. Chaol leaned over the book, reading intently. Does it say what purpose such a bond serves? Several purposes, apparently, Aldrich said. Sometimes it's the goddess's way of providing comfort to the grieving mate. Sometimes it's to preserve important bloodlines, and sometimes— He paused, his finger tracing the faded text. Sometimes it's to prepare both individuals for a future danger that requires their combined strengths. Silence fell over the library. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. Danger? What kind of danger? The text doesn't specify, Aldrich admitted. It simply says that resonance bonds are rarely formed without purpose, and that purpose is often revealed through trials that test both parties. Chaol closed the book with a heavy thud. So we're bound together by a dead woman's blood and the goddess's inscrutable plans, and we're supposed to wait for some undefined danger to reveal why. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Perfect. Your Majesty, Aldrich began. Leave us, Chaol said abruptly. Both of you, I need to think. Aldrich bowed and departed. Alara hesitated, unsure if she was included in the dismissal, but Chaol's next words clarified. Not you. Sit. She sat. Chaol paced the library, his movements restless and agitated. Alara watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He was a man at war with himself, torn between duty and desire, grief and the possibility of something new. Finally, he stopped and looked at her. I need to know if I can trust you. Alara blinked. Trust me with what? With the truth. With my weaknesses. With everything I've kept locked away since Liana died. His voice was raw. If we're truly bound by this resonance bond, if the goddess has some plan for us, then I cannot keep treating you like a stranger. But trust is hard for me now. I understand, Alara said softly. You've been betrayed by fate itself. Why would you trust anyone? Kyle's expression flickered. Surprise again, that she understood. Will you tell me about your mother? Everything you remember. If she truly was Liana's kin, then understanding her might help us understand this connection. So Alara told him. She spoke of her mother's kindness, her quiet strength, the way she had shielded Alara from the worst of the pack's cruelty. She told him about the fire, about watching her mother die, about the years of servitude that followed. She told him about the Beta's son and Morvana, about the false accusation and the moments before her execution, when she had thought her life was over. Chaol listened without interrupting, his golden eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, there were tears on her cheeks that she had not realized she was crying. Your mother sounds like she was remarkable, Chaol said quietly. She was all I had. And then you had nothing. It was not a question. Kyle moved closer, kneeling in front of her chair so they were at eye level. I'm sorry for what you've endured, Ilara. I'm sorry I've added to your pain by treating you as a burden instead of a person. "You've given me safety," Alara said. "That's more than anyone else ever did. Safety is the bare minimum. You deserve more than that." Kyle reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he took her hand. The resonance bond hummed between them, warm and constant. "I cannot promise you love. I cannot promise you a future, but I can promise you honesty and partnership in whatever the goddess has planned. Will that be enough?" Alara looked at their joined hands, at the name on her wrist that had brought them together, and she made her choice. "It will be enough," she said. "For now." Kyle's smile was small but genuine, the first real smile she had seen from him. "Then we begin tomorrow. Together we'll uncover what the goddess wants from us, and perhaps in the process, we'll both find something we didn't know we were looking for." Neither of them could have known how prophetic those words would be. The partnership that formed between Alara and Kale was tentative at first, built on shared curiosity rather than genuine trust. They spent hours in the library together, poring over ancient texts and consulting with the Pax elders, searching for any information that might explain the resonance bond, or predict what the goddess intended for them. Aldrich became their constant companion in these endeavors, his vast knowledge invaluable as they navigated obscure references and contradictory accounts. Winter deepened, and with it came a strange intimacy born of necessity. Kale shared things with Alara that he had told no one else, his fears about failing his pack, his guilt over surviving when Liana had not, the crushing loneliness that had defined his existence for 3 years. In turn, Alara found herself opening up about her own experiences, her own wounds, the parts of herself she had kept hidden even from her own awareness. They were not friends exactly, but they were no longer strangers. Darius watched their growing connection with something that looked like hope. "I haven't seen him this engaged with anything since Liana died," he told Alara one afternoon as they walked through the snow-covered gardens. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I'm not doing anything," Alara protested. "We're just trying to understand the mark." "You're giving him purpose beyond grief," Darius said. "That's more than anyone else has managed." He paused, his expression growing serious. "But be careful, Alara. Kyle's heart is still bound to Liana. If he starts to feel something for you that conflicts with his loyalty to her memory, the guilt might destroy him." "He won't feel anything for me," Alara said quietly. He made that clear. This is just about understanding the goddess's plan. Darius gave her a look that suggested he did not believe her, but he did not argue. The mark on Alara's wrist continued to fade, the letters growing fainter with each passing week. Morna had said it would disappear completely if they rejected what it represented, and Alara found herself checking it obsessively, afraid that it would vanish entirely and leave her with no connection to the only person who seemed to see her as more than just an Omega. She had grown dependent on Kale's presence, she realized with dismay. On his attention, his partnership, the way he looked at her like she mattered. It was dangerous, this attachment. He had been clear about his boundaries, about his eternal devotion to Lyanna. Alara had no right to want more than what he had offered. But the heart, she was learning, did not always obey logic. The turning point came on the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. The pack celebrated with a great feast, the halls filled with music and laughter and the warmth of community. Alara attended at Chaol's request, sitting at the high table beside him as was becoming customary. The pack had grown accustomed to her presence, though she still felt their curious stares, their whispered speculations. Chaol was different that night, more relaxed than she had ever seen him, his usual rigid control loosened by wine and the festive atmosphere. He laughed at Darius's jokes, debated philosophy with Aldrich, and even danced with some of the pack's unmated females, honoring tradition if not genuine interest. Alara watched from the table, feeling strangely hollow. This was Chaol as he must have been before tragedy struck. Charismatic, powerful, fully alive. She wanted that for him, wanted him to reclaim the parts of himself that grief had stolen. But watching him laugh and dance with others while she sat alone made her acutely aware of the distance between them, the invisible barrier she could never cross. As the night wore on, Chaol returned to the table, his face flushed from exertion and wine. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You should dance," he said, his voice slightly slurred. "You've been sitting here all night like a ghost." "I don't know how," Alara admitted. "We weren't taught dancing in the temple." Chaol's expression darkened briefly at the mention of her past, then cleared. "Then I'll teach you." He stood and offered his hand. "Come." Alara stared at his outstretched hand, her heart pounding. "Your Majesty, I don't think—" "That's an order, Omega," he said, but his tone was teasing, not cruel. "Dance with your king." Unable to refuse without causing a scene, Alara took his hand. The resonance bond flared at the contact, strong enough that they both inhaled sharply. Kyle's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the festive noise around them faded to nothing. Then he led her to the dance floor. The music was slow and melodic, a traditional waltz that the pack knew well. Chaol placed one hand on her waist, his touch careful, and held her other hand in his. "Follow my lead," he murmured. "Left foot back, right foot to the side, feet together. That's all there is to it." He guided her through the steps patiently, his body moving with a grace that surprised her. Alara stumbled at first, self-conscious and awkward, but Chaol held her steady, his strength reassuring. Gradually, she found the rhythm, her feet moving in time with his, and the world narrowed to just the two of them, the warmth of his hand on her waist, the golden intensity of his eyes, the bond between them humming like music beneath her skin. "You're a quick learner," Chaol said softly. "I have a good teacher." They danced in silence for a while, the rest of the hall forgotten. Alara was intensely aware of every point of contact between them, every breath, every heartbeat. This was the closest she had ever been to him, the most vulnerable he had allowed himself to be in her presence. She could feel his grief like a living thing, heavy and dark. But beneath it was something else, something warm and searching, reaching toward her despite his every effort to contain it. "Alara," Kale said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, a commotion erupted at the hall's entrance. The massive doors burst open, and a guard stumbled in, his face pale with fear. "Your Majesty!" he shouted. "We're under attack!" The music stopped instantly. Kyle released Alara and strode toward the guard, all traces of wine and relaxation gone, replaced by the cold authority of an Alpha King. "Report. Rogues, Your Majesty. Dozens of them, maybe more. They breached the eastern wall and are moving toward the castle." "They're not like any rogues we've seen before. They're organized, coordinated, and they're using dark magic." Dark magic? The words sent a chill through the hall. Dark magic had been forbidden for centuries, outlawed by every pack in the territory. Those who practiced it became corrupted. Their humanity eroded until only violence and hunger remained. Kale's expression hardened. "Sound the alarm. Get all non-combatants to the safe rooms." "Warriors, arm yourselves and meet me in the courtyard in 5 minutes." He turned to Darius. "Take command of the eastern defenses. I'll lead the main force." Darius nodded and sprinted from the hall, already shouting orders. The festive atmosphere dissolved into controlled chaos as people rushed to obey their king's commands. Alara stood frozen on the dance floor, unsure what to do, where to go. Kyle turned back to her, his eyes fierce. "Beatrice will take you to the safe rooms." "You'll be protected there. What about you?" Alara asked, fear rising in her throat. "I'll be fighting." He started to leave, then paused, looking back at her. "Stay safe, Alara. Whatever happens, stay in the safe rooms until I come for you." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd, and Alara felt the bond between them stretch and pull as distance separated them. Beatrice appeared at her side, her face grim but composed. "Come, miss, quickly." The safe rooms were deep beneath the castle, carved from solid rock and reinforced with iron and magic. Beatrice led Alara through corridors packed with frightened servants, children crying, Omegas huddled together for comfort. The sounds of battle filtered down from above. Shouts, the clash of weapons, the howls of wolves in their primal forms. The safe room they entered was large but crowded, filled with at least 50 people. Alara found a corner and pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. She could feel the bond pulling at her, urging her toward Kale, and it took all her willpower to stay put. Minutes passed like hours. The sounds of battle intensified, punctuated by explosions that shook dust from the ceiling. Someone screamed. A child sobbed. Alara closed her eyes and prayed to the goddess, begging for Kale's safety, for the pack's survival, for an end to the violence. Then the bond went cold. Alara gasped, clutching her chest as pain lanced through her. The connection that had been a constant presence since Kale first touched her, warm and reassuring, was suddenly absent. Not broken, but distant, as though something was blocking it. Something was wrong. "Beatrice," Alara said urgently, grabbing the older woman's arm. "Something's happened to the king. I can feel it. The bond." "You're just frightened," Beatrice said, trying to soothe her. His Majesty is the strongest alpha in the territory. He'll be fine. But Alara knew she was wrong. The bond did not lie. Kale was in danger, real danger, and she was hiding underground while he faced it alone. She made a decision. "I'm going up there," Alara said, standing. "Absolutely not." Beatrice grabbed her arm. "His Majesty ordered you to stay here, and you will obey." "He's in danger," Alara interrupted, her voice firm. "I don't know how I know, but I do." "And I'm not going to cower down here while he dies." She pulled free of Beatrice's grip and ran for the door. Behind her, Beatrice shouted for guards, but Alara was already through the entrance and racing up the stairs. She had no weapons, no training, no idea what she would do when she reached the battle. But the bond pulled her forward with inexorable force, and she could not resist it. The castle above was a war zone. Bodies lay in the corridors. Rogues, mostly, their twisted forms evidence of the dark magic that had corrupted them. But there were pack warriors, too, fallen in defense of their home. Alara stumbled past them, bile rising in her throat, following the pull of the bond toward the courtyard. She burst through the main doors and stopped, frozen by the scene before her. The courtyard was chaos. Wolves fought in their primal forms, teeth and claws flashing in the torchlight. Dark magic crackled through the air, visible as black lightning that struck randomly, leaving scorched earth where it landed. And in the center of it all was Kyle, in his massive silver wolf form, surrounded by rogues. He was magnificent and terrifying, a force of nature made flesh. But even as Alara watched, she saw him falter. Dark magic had struck him, leaving burns across his flank, and there were too many enemies. Too many for even an Alpha King to fight alone. The bond screamed at her to help him, but she had nothing to fight with, no way to defend herself, let alone him. Then she felt it, heat spreading from her wrist, from the mark that bore Liana's name. The fading letters suddenly blazed with light, bright enough to illuminate the entire courtyard. Alara gasped as power flooded through her, ancient and divine, the goddess's gift awakening in her blood. She did not know what she was doing. She acted on instinct, raising her hand toward the rogues surrounding Kale and willing them to stop. The light from her wrist expanded, forming a barrier of pure white energy that slammed into the rogues and sent them flying. They hit the ground and did not rise, their dark magic neutralized by the goddess's power. Kyle shifted back to human form, his eyes wide with shock as he stared at Alara. Around the courtyard, the battle began to turn. The pack warriors, seeing their king protected by divine magic, fought with renewed vigor. The rogues, faced with power they could not counter, began to retreat. But the magic flowing through Alara was too much. It burned through her veins like fire, overwhelming her mortal body. She screamed, falling to her knees, and the light from her wrist grew brighter, more intense, until it was blinding. Then everything went dark. Alara woke slowly, her body aching as though she had been torn apart and put back together. She was in her chambers, she realized, lying in her bed, with furs piled on top of her. Sunlight streamed through the windows. It was day, though she had no idea how much time had passed. You're awake." Kyle's voice drew her attention. He sat beside the bed, still in his battle-worn clothing, his face haggard with exhaustion. But he was alive. Whole. "What happened?" Alara's voice was hoarse. "You saved us," Kale said simply. "The goddess's power awakened in you, and you drove back the rogues. We won the battle because of you." He paused, his expression complex. "But the power nearly killed you. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days? Alara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her body. Kale reached out instinctively, steadying her, and the bond flared between them. Stronger than before, the coldness she had felt during the battle completely gone. "The bond," Alara whispered. "It's different." "I know." Kale's hand remained on her shoulder, his touch gentle. "When you used the goddess's power, something changed. The resonance bond. It's evolved into something more. Not a full mate bond, but closer. I can feel your emotions now, your pain, and you can feel mine." Alara closed her eyes, sensing the truth of his words. She could feel his relief at her awakening, his guilt that she had been hurt protecting him, and beneath it all, something warm and growing that he was trying desperately to deny. "I'm sorry," Kale said quietly. "I told you to stay in the safe rooms. If you had listened, you wouldn't have been hurt." "If I had listened, you would be dead," Alara countered. "The bond told me you were in danger. I couldn't ignore that." Kale's jaw tightened. "You could have been killed. So could you." Alara met his eyes steadily. "We're connected, Kyle. The goddess made that clear when she gave me the power to save you. You can keep fighting it, keep trying to maintain distance, but it won't change what is." "What is?" Kale's voice was barely audible. "That we're meant to face whatever comes together. Not as king and subject, not as two people bound by obligation. But as equals, chosen by the goddess for a purpose we're only beginning to understand." Kale stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Then slowly, he took her hand, the one with Liana's name, and raised it to his lips. The mark blazed briefly at the contact, brighter than it had been in weeks. "I have been fighting this," he admitted. "Fighting you. Fighting the bond. Fighting the possibility that the goddess might be offering me a second chance at something I thought I had lost forever. Because accepting it feels like betraying Liana's memory. Or," Alara said gently, "the goddess is honoring Liana's memory by ensuring you don't spend the rest of your life alone. By bringing you someone who carries her blood, her strength, and who understands loss the way you do." Kale's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You think Liana would have wanted this? I think she loved you enough to want you to be happy, even without her." Alara squeezed his hand. "And I think the goddess doesn't make mistakes." A sound escaped Kale, half laugh, half sob. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking, and Alara realized he was crying for the first time since Liana's death. She reached out and pulled him close, ignoring the pain in her body, and held him while he grieved and released, and finally, slowly, began to heal. When his tears subsided, Kale pulled back and looked at her with eyes that were raw but clear. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to move forward without feeling like I'm leaving her behind." "You're not leaving her behind," Alara said. "She's part of you, part of your story, but she doesn't have to be the end of it." She touched the mark on her wrist, now glowing softly. "I bear her name, Kale. In a way, she brought us together. Maybe that's her gift to both of us." Kale studied the mark, then looked back at Alara's face. "Will you be patient with me, while I figure out how to do this without drowning in guilt?" "I've been patient my entire life," Alara said with a small smile. "I can wait a little longer." "You shouldn't have to wait." Kale's voice was fierce. "You've waited long enough for someone to see you, to value you, to give you the life you deserve. I will try, Alara. I will try to be what you need." "Just be honest with me," Alara said. "That's all I need. Honesty and time and the knowledge that we're in this together." Kale leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy and trust. The bond hummed between them, warm and right, and for the first time since arriving at the castle, Alara felt truly at peace. "Together," Kyle murmured. "I can do that." The days following the battle were filled with recovery and rebuilding. The pack mourned their dead and celebrated their survival, and through it all, Kale and Alara remained side by side. They investigated the source of the rogue attack, discovering that it had been orchestrated by enemies who sought to destabilize Kale's rule. The dark magic had been supplied by a rogue faction that Kale's warriors hunted down and eliminated. Through it all, the bond between them grew stronger. Kale was true to his word. He was honest about his struggles, his moments of doubt, his lingering grief. But he also made efforts to see Alara for who she was, not just as an echo of Liana, but as a person with her own strengths and dreams. He gave her responsibilities within the pack, trusting her with administrative duties that utilized her growing education. He consulted her on decisions, valued her input, treated her as a partner in ruling. And slowly, carefully, he allowed himself to feel things for her that went beyond duty or gratitude. Alara, for her part, was patient. She did not push for more than Kale could give, did not demand declarations or promises. She simply existed beside him, offering support and understanding, and let the bond weave them together at its own pace. The mark on her wrist never faded completely after the battle. It remained, a constant reminder of the connection between them and the blessing of the goddess who had brought them together. Some nights, when they sat together in the library or walked the ramparts under the stars, Kale would trace the letters with his finger and wonder aloud at the mystery of it all. "Do you think Liana knew?" he asked one evening as winter began to give way to spring. "When she was dying, do you think she knew the goddess would send you to me?" "I don't know," Alara said honestly, "but I like to think she did. I like to think she's at peace, knowing you're not alone." Kyle smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time in 3 years. I'm not alone, he agreed. Thanks to you. 6 months after the solstice battle, Chaol made his intentions clear before the entire pack. He did not ask Alara to be his mate. The bond was not the same as the one he had shared with Lyanna, and he was honest about that. But he declared her his chosen consort, his partner in ruling, and the one the goddess had marked as his second chance at happiness. The pack accepted it. Some had reservations, whispers about the propriety of a king taking an Omega as his consort. But those whispers died when they saw how Alara handled her new role with grace and intelligence. She became beloved in her own right, not as a replacement for Lyanna, but as a new pillar of strength for the kingdom. And Chaol, who had thought his capacity for love had died with his mate, found himself falling for the quiet Omega who bore his dead wife's name and carried the goddess's blessing in her blood. On the anniversary of the battle, they stood together on the ramparts, watching the sun set over the mountains. Chaol held Alara close, his arm around her waist, and she leaned into his warmth. "Thank you," Chaol said softly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for seeing past my grief to the man I could be again, for being brave enough to walk into danger to save me, even when I had given you no reason to care whether I lived or died." Alara turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me safety when I had none. You gave me value when I thought I was worthless." "You showed me that I could be more than what others made me believe." She touched his face gently. "Of course I cared whether you lived or died. The bond wouldn't let me do otherwise." "Is that the only reason?" Chaol asked, his voice hopeful and vulnerable. Alara smiled. "No. The bond brought me to you. But I stayed because of who you are, grief-stricken and broken and trying so hard to heal. You're worth caring about, Chaol. Worth loving." It was the first time she had used that word. Chaol's breath caught, his eyes searching hers. "Do you? Love me?" "I do," Alara said simply. "I know it's not the same as what you had with Lyanna." "It's not," Chaol interrupted. "But that doesn't make it less. It's different. And it's ours, and it's real." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you too, Alara. I don't know when it happened, when the bond became something more, but it did. You're not a replacement or a consolation prize. You're you, and that's exactly who I want." Tears streamed down Alara's face, but they were tears of joy. Chaol kissed them away, then kissed her lips, and the bond blazed between them like the sun. On her wrist, Lyanna's name glowed one final time, bright and warm, and then it transformed. The letters rearranged themselves, flowing like water, until they formed new words. Goddess's blessing. Alara gasped, staring at the mark. Chaol saw it too, his eyes widening. They looked at each other, understanding dawning. This had been Lyanna's gift all along, her blessing from beyond death, arranged by the goddess to ensure Chaol would not spend eternity alone. The mark had been her name to lead them together, and now it was a blessing to seal their future. "She approved," Alara whispered, awed. "She loved me enough to want me to be happy," Chaol said, his voice thick with emotion. "And the goddess honored that love by bringing me you." They stood together as night fell and stars emerged, two souls bound by tragedy and healed by divine grace, ready to face whatever the future held. Together. The goddess had brought them through fire and grief, through battle and doubt, and had forged from their pain something beautiful and new. An Omega who had been nothing became a queen in all but name. A king who had been broken became whole again. And the mark on Ilara's wrist, glowing softly in the starlight, was a reminder that even in the darkest times, the goddess's plans were always for the good of those who trusted her. Their story was not what either of them had expected, but it was theirs, written by fate and sealed by choice, and they would spend the rest of their lives honoring the gift they had been given: each other.